I still remember the day the letter arrived, how it landed on my doormat like a bomb in slow motion. At first, I thought it was some mistake, a routine notice from the city, maybe a reminder about property taxes. But as I tore open the envelope, my heart sank and refused to beat at a normal pace. The words on the page blurred together for a moment. Notice of eviction. My parents. They were suing me. I sat on the edge of my couch staring at the paper, my hands shaking, my chest tightening. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced to my sister, her name, the reason this was happening, her dream home. Everything clicked into place with brutal clarity. They were pushing me out so she could have what they called her first house, a phrase now tasting like bile in my mouth. I felt the world shift under me, my childhood memories of favoritism, of always being second, replaying like a cruel slideshow. I couldn't believe it. How could they, my own parents, turn their love into a weapon, redirect it to someone else while I was left counting the empty spaces of my own home? The injustice burned hotter than I had imagined. And the worst part was that it wasn't just about the house. It was about proving, once again, that I was replaceable, unwanted, unworthy in their eyes. My stomach twisted as I read and reread the legal jargon, each line stripping away any sense of comfort or safety. It was real. Every letter screamed that I was being forced out, not for any failing of mine, but to satisfy my sister's ambitions. My hands shook as I thought about the memories embedded in these walls, the nights I had cried alone, the mornings I had silently cleaned up after them, the years I had poured into this home, thinking it was mine by right. And now it wasn't. My chest tightened with a mix of rage and fear. My sister, the golden child, would waltz in, while I was expected to vanish quietly. I could feel the sting of humiliation pressing down on me already. As I sank to the floor, the eviction notice clutched in my hand. A single thought kept repeating in my mind. They didn't know who they were messing with. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My mind, spinning with disbelief, began plotting silently. I would not disappear quietly. Not this time. And as I looked at the walls around me, walls that had witnessed my life, my sacrifices, my loneliness, I realized I had to find a way to turn this betrayal into something they would regret. Even as I sat on the floor, gripping that eviction notice, my mind drifted backward, unbidden, to the years that had led to this moment. I remembered my earliest memories, when my sister's every whim seemed to take precedence over my existence. Birthdays were the clearest example. Her parties were lavish, filled with friends, gifts, and attention, while mine were minimal, almost an afterthought, marked by perfunctory smiles and sighs of obligation. I had learned early on that in this family, love and approval weren't distributed equally. They were rationed, reserved for the child who could best reflect their pride and social image. Every parent-teacher meeting, every school performance, every scraped knee or minor accomplishment of mine was met with polite acknowledgement at best, lukewarm praise at worst, while hers was celebrated as if the world itself had paused to applaud. I thought of the small betrayals, the ones I had rationalized as misunderstandings, the forgotten calls, the canceled plans, the times I had been blamed for things I hadn't done, all while she got a pass. It wasn't just the attention, it was the signal that my worth was always secondary, a backdrop to her narrative. I remembered lying awake at night, hearing the house hum with activity while I felt invisible, my accomplishments dismissed, my feelings minimized. Even when I succeeded academically or socially, it was somehow insufficient, unremarkable, as if the world already expected me to underperform. And then there were the comparisons. Every success of hers was a reminder of my own shortcomings, though she had never had to work harder or struggle more. I tried to push these memories away, but they surged back, a tidal wave of quiet suffering. The Christmas mornings when she got the gift I had longed for. The summer trip she begged for that I wasn't allowed to join. The subtle favoritism at family dinners where she sat at the head of the table, and I was tucked out of sight. Each memory carried a sting that now felt unbearable. I realized with a pang of clarity that my parents' decision to evict me wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was the culmination of a lifetime of consistent, measured neglect and favoritism. This house, my home, had always been a stage for inequality, a place where I had learned that love could be conditional and often cruel. And yet, despite it all, I had stayed. I had endured, hoping naively that love might be fair, that recognition might come, that I might one day be seen as more than the shadow of my sister. Now, staring at the eviction notice, I felt a mix of sorrow, anger, and awakening. The childhood lessons of invisibility had prepared me, in a way, for this ultimate betrayal, but they also lit a fire inside me. If they thought I would go quietly, if they thought years of neglect had broken me, they were gravely mistaken. The history of favoritism, the memories of disregard, the quiet accumulation of slights, all of it had built me into someone who would not be dismissed so easily. And in that moment, I promised myself that this time, I would be the one writing the story's next chapter. I remember standing in the kitchen, the eviction notice trembling in my hands as my parents looked at me, faces calm as if discussing the weather, instead of a lifetime of love being auctioned off to the highest favored child. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice cracking, disbelief twisting around every word. You're evicting me." My father's gaze didn't waver, his tone measured. "It's time for a change," he said. "Your sister deserves this house. We're just helping her get what's rightfully hers." My chest tightened so sharply I thought I might collapse. I wanted to scream, to shake some humanity into them, to make them see the sheer cruelty in what they were doing. Rightfully hers? You're talking about me like I don't exist, like everything I've done here means nothing. My mother, sitting quietly, nodded once, faintly, almost apologetically, but her eyes lacked any warmth. The weight of years of favoritism and small betrayals pressed down on me, sharper now because it had reached its zenith. "Do you even hear yourself?" I demanded, tears forming in my eyes. "Evicting your own child for someone else's dream? This crosses a line I never thought you'd cross." My father's lips tightened, but he didn't back down. "It's just how life works," he said, as if that explained everything. The room felt impossibly small, each breath I took seeming to push against the invisible walls of their moral indifference. I thought of all the times I had carried the family through emergencies, the nights I stayed up caring for them when no one noticed, the small sacrifices that never merited recognition. And now, as I stood here, all of it reduced to collateral for my sister's ambitions. Anger rose like a tide I couldn't contain. "I gave everything for this family," I said, my voice trembling but steadying. "Everything. And this is how you repay me?" My mother shifted uncomfortably but didn't offer the comfort or remorse I longed for. "Life isn't fair," she murmured, as if her casual shrug could erase years of neglect. That was the moment I realized their greed wasn't just a bad decision, it was a philosophy. A moral void had replaced any parental care, any sense of right or wrong. I felt my heart break in slow, excruciating increments. But beneath it all, a seed of resolve took root. If they thought they could break me, erase me from this house, and watch me bow quietly, they were gravely mistaken. I would not crumble. I would not vanish. This confrontation, raw and gutting, had revealed the full extent of their betrayal, and it had lit a fire I knew would not be extinguished. The next evening, the whole family gathered in the living room, the air thick with tension and the unspoken accusations that had been building for days. My sister sat smugly, as if the eviction notice were some minor inconvenience that didn't concern her. My parents exchanged glances, calm on the surface but tense beneath. And then, my 7-year-old, perched quietly on the edge of the sofa, looked up at all of us with wide, innocent eyes and asked the question that cut sharper than any argument. "Why are we being treated like this?" The room fell silent. Every head turned toward the child, and suddenly, the stark injustice of the situation could no longer be hidden behind legal jargon or excuses. I felt my chest tighten, my throat raw, as I realized the weight of the words. Here was someone who trusted that family meant fairness, love, protection, and they were seeing it unravel. My parents' carefully constructed defenses faltered under the simple clarity of the question. My sister's smug smile faltered, replaced by the slightest flicker of discomfort. I could feel the tension spike as the moral implications landed in the room, undeniable and unyielding. My child's innocence had stripped the conversation of pretense. Every excuse sounded hollow. Every justification exposed as greed. In that moment, guilt radiated off my parents, subtle but undeniable, and the room seemed to shrink with the weight of unspoken shame. I squeezed my child's hand under the table, silently acknowledging the bravery it took to speak truth to a house full of adults who had forgotten what fairness looked like. The question lingered, hanging in the air like a mirror reflecting everything we had been avoiding. It humanized the conflict in a way nothing else could, and in that fragile, piercing moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with this innocence bearing witness, justice might not be so easily ignored. After the meeting, I retreated to the quiet of my bedroom, closing the door against the hum of the family outside. The eviction notice still sat on the desk, a silent reminder that everything I had built, all I had worked for, could be stripped from me with a few signatures. I felt a crushing wave of shame, a bitter mix of failure and disbelief. How had it come to this? I had spent years sacrificing for this family, countless nights helping with their errands, countless hours smoothing over their mistakes, invisible labor that had gone unnoticed or unappreciated. Yet here I was, being cast aside like an inconvenience, as if my presence had always been optional. The helplessness gnawed at me, and I found myself reliving every slight, every instance where my contributions were dismissed, every birthday ignored, every achievement minimized. I remembered my mother praising my sister for things I had done just as well, my father complimenting her abilities while I remained invisible. Even the small things, the way my ideas were ignored during family discussions, the way my needs were postponed for others, flashed vividly in my mind. I realized that the pain I felt now was not sudden. It was the accumulation of decades of neglect and favoritism. The shame wasn't just about losing the house. It was about finally seeing the truth of my place in this family, about acknowledging that love had been conditional, a currency doled out unevenly. And yet, beneath the sorrow and fear, there was anger simmering, a slow-building heat that refused to be extinguished. I thought of my child, whose innocent question had pierced the veneer of civility during the family meeting. That question echoed in my mind, mingling with my memories of overlooked sacrifices, and slowly, determination began to replace despair. I wasn't powerless. I might have felt cornered, humiliated, even abandoned, but I still had my mind, my voice, and my ability to fight. And in that dark room, wrestling with shame and fear, I began to map the first outlines of a plan. The helplessness that had seemed all-consuming started to fracture under the weight of my resolve. If they thought they could erase me quietly, they had severely underestimated me. And as the evening shadows stretched across the walls, I felt a quiet but unmistakable shift. I was no longer just the family's overlooked child. I was someone who would reclaim what was mine, someone who would ensure that every ounce of betrayal and neglect would be met with consequences, carefully and deliberately delivered. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The helplessness that had weighed me down the night before began to transform into quiet determination. I started by organizing every document I could find, bills I had paid, repairs I had handled, contributions I had made to the home, and even small records of favors I had done for my parents and siblings over the years. Each page, each receipt, each note was a reminder that I had invested more in this house and in this family than anyone seemed willing to acknowledge. With evidence in hand, I scheduled meetings with lawyers who specialized in family disputes, their calm professionalism grounding me in a reality I could finally control. For the first time, I began to see the situation not just as a personal betrayal, but as a challenge I could navigate strategically. Every question I asked, every document I provided, became a small assertion of power in a relationship where I had long been treated as powerless. As I researched laws, court procedures, and even loopholes, a growing confidence settled in my chest. I found myself smiling at minor victories, a lawyer nodding in approval, a clause discovered that could work in my favor, the realization that my parents had underestimated my ability to fight back. The house, once a prison of shame and neglect, now became a battleground where I could assert my worth and demand recognition. With each step, the fear that had clutched at my heart loosened, replaced by the thrill of reclaiming agency. I imagined my parents' faces when I began presenting undeniable proof of their favoritism, their disregard, their selective generosity. Even small, quiet victories, a phone call returned promptly, a document filed correctly, a legal strategy clarified, felt monumental. They reminded me that I was no longer just the overlooked child. I was someone who had learned the rules of the game and was ready to play. And with every passing day, as I built my case, collected my evidence, and quietly tested the waters of legal power, I felt the first real taste of empowerment, a fire that promised the eventual reversal of every injustice they had inflicted upon me. Word of the eviction and the underlying favoritism began to seep out, carried in hushed conversations and curious glances. Neighbors who had once greeted me with polite smiles now lingered, their eyes betraying quiet judgment or sympathy. Friends called, careful in their tones, offering support while probing for details I wasn't ready to share. Even extended family members who had long turned a blind eye started to notice patterns they hadn't before. The way my sister received gifts and attention with little effort. The way my parents celebrated her milestones while overlooking mine. Each observation, each whispered comment, stoked a slow-burning tension inside me. I realized the injustice wasn't just private. It was visible, almost glaring to anyone paying attention. And with that visibility came opportunity. I began contemplating how to use social leverage to my advantage, how to let the subtle truths of favoritism and neglect speak for themselves. Perhaps sharing a few careful details, allowing witnesses to see the inequality firsthand, could amplify the pressure. Maybe a tactful revelation at a gathering or a measured conversation with relatives could make them question the morality of my parents' actions. I wasn't yet ready to lay everything bare, but the possibility of turning public awareness into power thrilled me. The social tension swirling around the house became a tool, a silent ally that could support my growing strategy. I realized that every subtle slight my parents had thought went unnoticed was now part of the story I could wield, and in the quiet moments, I pictured the eventual reckoning, knowing that when the world saw the pattern of favoritism and betrayal, it would lend weight to my fight, reminding everyone, including my parents, that actions have consequences. The day the case was officially filed, I arrived at the courthouse with a mixture of anxiety and determination. The polished floors and echoing hallways felt intimidating, yet I carried with me the quiet strength I had been building for weeks. As the proceedings began, I listened to my parents' opening statements, their words measured and practiced, framing the eviction as a reasonable decision, a matter of logistics rather than a cruel preference for my sister. My stomach twisted as I realized how casually they could strip me of my home and my dignity while presenting themselves as benevolent figures. When my turn came, I spoke in the first person, recounting my years of contribution, my sacrifices that had gone unnoticed, and the quiet ways I had supported this family even when it felt like I was invisible. Each word reminded me in the court of the emotional labor that had been my life, the countless ways I had kept this household functioning without recognition or gratitude. Flashbacks emerged naturally in my mind, slipping into the narrative as I spoke. The nights I stayed up nursing a sick sibling, the weekends spent repairing damage no one else noticed, the holidays I had sacrificed to ensure my sister had perfect celebrations. The judge and jury were witnesses not just to my testimony, but to the invisible history of effort and care that had been ignored for years. My parents' calm exterior occasionally faltered, their glances betraying discomfort as I detailed each overlooked contribution, each small injustice. Objections came, lawyers interjected, but I held my composure, allowing my emotional truth to anchor my statements. I described the pattern of favoritism not as bitterness, but as a documented reality, a consistent series of choices that had disregarded me entirely. The courtroom became a stage for both my vindication and my parents' unraveling, each flashback reinforcing why I deserved recognition, justice, and ultimately, my home. By the time the opening statements concluded, I felt a shift in the room, a subtle acknowledgement that the narrative of unfairness and neglect was no longer invisible. The tension between personal emotion and legal procedure kept the energy high, but beneath it all, I clung to the hope that truth and justice could finally prevail in a place that had long ignored both. While reviewing documents and statements in preparation for the next hearing, I stumbled upon inconsistencies that made my blood run cold and my pulse race with sudden exhilaration. Hidden accounts, unreported transfers, and legal loopholes that my parents had assumed I would never notice suddenly revealed themselves under my scrutiny. It wasn't just favoritism or emotional neglect anymore. There was deliberate manipulation, an attempt to rewrite ownership and control in ways that were legally questionable. I felt a surge of outrage as the picture became clear. They had planned this eviction with precision, assuming my naivety and trust would prevent me from noticing. And yet this same deception now became my leverage. The very documents meant to silence me were evidence of their miscalculations. A spark of hope ignited, tempered by the anger that fueled it. I realized I held the tools to turn the situation entirely in my favor. My heart thudded as I imagined presenting these revelations in court, the subtle gasps and stunned expressions as my parents' careful plan unraveled before everyone's eyes. For the first time, I sensed that the balance of power was shifting, that their years of manipulation and neglect could backfire spectacularly. The fire of outrage mingled with the thrill of strategy, and I understood that this discovery was more than a twist in the legal case. It was the first major step toward reclaiming my dignity, my home, and the recognition I had been denied for a lifetime. The day my 7-year-old spoke in court, I felt time slow. With wide, earnest eyes, my child recounted moments I had lived with silently, the nights I comforted siblings, the sacrifices I had made, and the subtle ways my parents had overlooked or dismissed me. Every word landed with clarity and weight that even the most practiced adults could not ignore. The courtroom fell silent, the moral gravity of the situation crystallizing in a child's simple, honest observations. My parents shifted uncomfortably, guilt flickering across their faces in ways words could never convey. My sister's smugness evaporated, replaced by a confused unease that she had never felt before. I squeezed my child's hand beneath the table, pride swelling in my chest. In that moment, the innocence and truth of a child became a weapon of justice, an undeniable force that highlighted the depth of the betrayal and the righteousness of my fight. The scales of power subtly, irrevocably, began to tip. The day of the final hearing arrived like a storm I had been bracing for months. The courtroom was tense, hushed, every eye focused on the proceedings, waiting for a resolution that had been long overdue. My parents sat rigid, their composure strained, while my sister's usual confidence seemed fragile, as if she suddenly realized that the carefully constructed world she had relied on was unraveling. When it was my turn, I spoke with a clarity and calm I hadn't known I possessed. I recounted, step by step, my years of sacrifice, the invisible labor, the countless ways I had upheld the family while being ignored, and the deliberate favoritism that had led to this eviction attempt. Then, I presented the evidence of their hidden financial maneuvers, the discrepancies, the legal oversights, each document punctuating the story of betrayal they had assumed would remain hidden. As I spoke, the air seemed to shift. Judges, lawyers, and even observers leaned in, absorbing not just the facts, but the emotional weight, the human cost, of their decisions. My child's words from the previous hearing lingered, a reminder of innocence and truth piercing the pretense of privilege. My parents' faces drained of color, their defenses crumbling under the combination of hard evidence and undeniable moral authority. I could see the realization dawning. Their actions had consequences they hadn't anticipated. The final arguments were deliberate, each phrase chosen to underscore fairness, equity, and the moral imperative they had violated. I asserted my right to the home not just legally, but ethically, emotionally, and socially. The courtroom felt suspended in a taut silence as the judgment was read, each word a vindication that resonated far beyond the legal text. My sister, once smug and untouchable, lowered her gaze, her confidence replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of wrongdoing. My parents' rigid authority had been dismantled, replaced by the undeniable truth that I had been wronged, that justice had finally been served. In that moment, I felt a rush of relief, empowerment, and quiet triumph. It was more than a legal victory. It was the reclaiming of dignity, the assertion of worth, the moral reckoning that had been denied to me for years. The room, heavy with tension moments before, now seemed to exhale, the emotional weight finally finding resolution. And as I looked around, the faces of those who had doubted or ignored me were now mirrors of recognition. The overlooked child had emerged not just victorious, but undeniably seen, acknowledged, and validated. After the courtroom emptied and the legal dust settled, I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, finally able to breathe without the weight of looming eviction pressing down on me. The adrenaline of confrontation had faded, leaving a deep, reflective calm. I realized how much I had grown, not just in assertiveness, but in understanding my own value and boundaries. For years, I had allowed my parents' favoritism and neglect to define me, but now I knew that my worth wasn't contingent on their approval. My child's presence during the proceedings had been a profound gift, their innocence and honesty illuminating truths I sometimes struggled to voice myself. I thought about the impact on them, how witnessing courage and moral strength in the face of betrayal could shape their understanding of justice, empathy, and resilience. The fear that had once gripped me, the shame and helplessness, now seemed distant, replaced by a quiet confidence I hadn't known I possessed. I understood, too, that this victory was more than personal. It was a moral lesson, a demonstration that fairness and integrity could triumph even against years of manipulation and cruelty. I felt gratitude for the clarity the ordeal had provided, and a deep commitment to fostering a family environment rooted in honesty, care, and respect, something I had yearned for all my life. In this calm aftermath, I allowed myself a small smile, recognizing that while the scars of betrayal would remain, so would the knowledge that I had reclaimed not just a home, but my dignity and the right to be seen. Weeks after the case, the house felt different, though the echoes of the past lingered in its walls. My parents and sister were still part of my life, but the dynamics had shifted irrevocably. The favoritism, the dismissals, the subtle cruelties, they were no longer invisible forces shaping my self-worth. I had achieved closure, not by erasing the past, but by confronting it fully, demanding accountability, and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Every corner of the house, once a reminder of neglect and betrayal, now stood as a testament to resilience, to the power of standing firm in one's truth. I looked at my child, whose eyes reflected both innocence and the newfound understanding of moral courage, and felt a profound sense of responsibility and pride. The emotional payoff was undeniable. I had transformed pain into empowerment, betrayal into clarity, and despair into hope. Life would remain complicated. Relationships could not simply reset. Yet for the first time, I felt untethered from the chains of favoritism and moral compromise. I had proven, to myself, to my child, and to anyone paying attention, that dignity, patience, and courage could overcome even the deepest injustices. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself to reflect with satisfaction, knowing that while the past could not be rewritten, the future was mine to shape, guided by empathy, strength, and the moral authority I had finally earned.